I been standing here in 1950, you'd be wondering what I was doing. And you'd probably also be wanting to chuck me a life belt, because where I'm standing is the Canal Park. And I'm standing right in the middle of what would have been the Glamorganshire Canal. In the 1950s it would be derelict, but it still would have been not a place to be standing. But it's not the canal today that I'm interested in, but what ran alongside it. You see, there was a small 3-mile freight-only railway called the Glamorganshire Canal Railway, or the GCR, and it has its own place in history, and I'm going to tell you its story. In 1882, the Bute Estates owned the canal. They had looked at, well, could they buy it up and convert it into a railway, which didn't happen, and that's a story for another day. But they deposited a bill into Parliament entitled, I've got to read this because it's a long one, an Act to empower the Company of the Proprietors of the Glamorganshire Canal Navigation and to make and maintain a railway and other works at Cardiff, and to raise further monies for other purposes. So basically allowed them to build a small railway alongside the canal, and that is what they did. The best way to look at it is to look at some maps and look at some photos. So it started near West Canal Wharf, which is now underneath the roundabout. Ran down beside the timber ponds, which you can see in the aerial photo. Timber ponds, by the way, were places where, believe it or not, they stored timber. And the reason they stored the timber was it stopped it drying out and cracking. This photo looks towards the sea and shows the canal on the left, the Taffs on the right, and the line heading past the warehouses at the back of the canal. The other railway, by the way, is the GWR line that went down to Clarence Road Station. Continuing along the western bank, the line linked with some sand wharfs at Harrowby Street, and then it crossed Clarence Road on the level, before terminating down at the end, about a quarter of a mile past the sea lock, going slightly off at an angle. If you look at this image, you can see the sea lock, and you can see there the railway with some trucks on it. Clarence Road, a swing bridge, crossed the canal and completed a road link over to James Street, Bute Docks. And this canal was wide, so this swing bridge would open and close quite regularly to let traffic through. One of the things you can appreciate here is what the width of this canal would have been. The railway would have gone along this bit here, and down where those trees are there, but the rest of it would have been canal. It would have been really wide. This is not your little Kennet and Avon, Grand Union, couple of narrowboat type of width of canal. This would have been a very large section of that canal. They bought a small tank locomotive called Glamorgan. It was an 040 saddle tank, and it was built by Hawthorne Leslie. It was in service until about 1931, then it was sold to a tinplate works up near Caerphilly. There are no photos of it, but this is an identical one which has made preservation. And so you can see the sort of size we're talking about. This wasn't a big passenger railway. This was a little freight line. They then built a similar loco called Rumney, which was used for a couple of years, after which they bought Delwyn. Now, Delwyn was an Avonside loco built in 1911 and stayed with the railway until 1947. It was then sold on, and this is an image of it in its new guise. There were a couple of other locos which they had on spot hire to cover for when these three were basically in the sheds being overhauled or had faults on them or what have you. But Glamorgan, Rumney and Dilwyn really were the mainstays of this line for many, many years. It is fair to say at this stage that the canal wasn't in good condition, and in 1942 there was a landslip up in Pontypridd, and that put an end to through traffic coming from Merthyr down to Cardiff. The Butes were keen to see the back of it and put it up for sale, and the purchasers were quite surprising because it was bought by Cardiff Corporation or Cardiff Council. In 1944 they took over, and they'd already put a bill through Parliament to abandon it, and it was abandoned. Why did they want it? Well, they wanted to lay a pipeline down parts of it, and the rest of it, well, that could just rot. However, there was a problem. There was the sand traders down here at Harrowby Wharf, and they wanted to keep this bit of the canal going, because they were taking sand out of the channel, bringing it into the canal, and then depositing on the wharf, and it was being shipped. So they had to keep it open for a bit longer. What happened next surprised everybody, because the council bought a new loco. And they didn't just go out and buy another steam loco, they went left field. They purchased a four-wheel Greenwood and Batley battery locomotive. It was painted crimson lake, same as the trolley buses and the motor buses, had the crest of the corporation on the side. It cost them £1,570, and they had to build a charging station for an extra cost of £210, which was on the side of the railway in Harrowby Street. Despite its colour, it was known as Greenbat, named after Greenwood and Batley. There are very few photos of Greenbat that I've been able to find that I can use. They exist, but they're in books, and I don't go scanning books. This one shows the loco side on, and shows it kind of like X Works. And the main one that I've been able to find which shows it in action is this one. It's at the James Street swing bridge, and there's quite a lot to see here. Note the wires, for example, for the trolley bus, and note the fact that the gate is closed on the bridge, not to allow the bridge to swing, but allow the locomotive to go past. Sadly, it didn't make it to preservation era. It was just that little bit too early to start preserving interesting things, but others did. And this is an identical loco up at the Ribble Railway up in Lancashire. I'll give you some idea of the size of it, and if you think, oh, that's cute, I fancy one of those, you can buy a model. This one's available online. In 1951, a sandsucker, which is a great name for a boat, called Catherine Ethel, hit the sea lock gates, and did so with such force and with some very weakened gates that it actually smashed through them, and the resulting Niagara effect emptied the canal. That was the end of the Glamorganshire Canal. You can see in this image, taken over the bay many years later, the canal down the bottom with no gates and no water in it. It still stayed there for quite some years in this condition. Surprisingly, the railway kept going for another 12 years. The council kept it open. And even though there were a few traders that were still here, there was enough to basically keep it busy. In 1963, events forced their hands. Mr. Callaghan, who was the railway foreman, decided to retire. When they looked at the books, they found out that the railway was actually costing them twice as much as it was bringing in revenue. They decided to close it, and the other two people who worked on the line were found jobs elsewhere in the council works department. Greenbat was withdrawn and, as I say, scrapped. It went to Western Metals down in Ferry Road in 1965. It is said at the time it had a tendency to ride the rails and to derail very easily, and someone has told me that there were chunks in the wheel flanges the size of half crowns taken out of it. You don't know what half a crown looks like, think £2 coin. This engine was not in a good condition. Today there's very little to see of the line and formation. It literally has been almost eradicated, apart from this one small clue. And the main clue to this line even being here is this very noisy Dumbles Road. But you notice there's this path, lovely little. So if there's this path, why is that there at an angle? You would have thought if there's a pathway which runs into the park, goes straight over into Loudon Square, down to the basketball court and the playground. Why is this laid back here? Well, it's when you start looking at the photos, you will see, back to this one we saw at the start with the timber pond, this little slip here. And when we actually translate that into a map, you can see the line goes from the Glamorganshire Canal Railway and seems to head towards the Great Western Line. The Great Western Line would have been over here. So the angle of this here shows where the line would have been. And it would have disappeared up there, across the road, and joined up with the Great Western Railway heading down towards Clarence Street. Today there's nothing left to show there was even a railway here, or the main line over there. And there is one other thing. Going back to that Hawthorne-Leslie locomotive, Glamorgan, works number 2419. Believe it or not, this works plate still exists, and I want to say thank you very much to Peter Thorne at the National Museum in York. This is in the warehouse and it's hidden away from sort of normal eyes, and Peter has sent me down this photograph of it. My great thanks to him. It's just one small piece of evidence that this line existed. It was never grouped, it never carried passengers officially. I think one or two people got a few lifts in Greenbat now and again. But it's a part of Cardiff's industrial history, and so I think the story needs to be told. My thanks to Brian Rowley, who has supplied an awful lot of personal memories of the line and also an awful lot of factual information. And to Peter Brabham for the picture of Greenbat at James Street Bridge. My thanks as always to everybody else who supplied information. If you want to know more about the line, there's a chapter in this book all about the Glamorganshire canals, and I'll put a link in the description down below to the Amazon site where you can buy it. I'll be back out again soon doing more, so in the meantime please like, subscribe, tell your friends, press that bell notification button, bing, and until next time.